David Turner, who did everything in small, quick movements, hurried from the bus stop down the avenue toward his street. He reached the grocery on the corner and hesitated. There had been something. Butter, he remembered with relief. This morning, all the way up the avenue to his bus stop, he had been telling himself, "Butter. Don't forget butter coming home tonight when you pass the grocery. Remember, butter." He went into the grocery and waited his turn, examining the cans on the shelves. Canned pork sausage was back, and corned beef hash. A tray full of rolls caught his eye, and then the woman ahead of him went out and the clerk turned to him. "How much is butter?" David asked cautiously. "$89, the clerk said easily. "$89? David frowned. "That's what it is," the clerk said. He looked past David at the next customer. "Quarter of a pound, please," David said. "And a half dozen rolls." Carrying his package home, he thought, "I really ought not to trade there anymore. You'd think they'd know me well enough to be more courteous." There was a letter from his mother in the mailbox. He stuck it into the top of the bag of rolls and went upstairs to the 3rd floor. No light in Marcia's apartment, the only other apartment on the floor. David turned to his own door and unlocked it, snapping on the light as he came in the door. Tonight, as every night when he came home, the apartment looked warm and friendly and good. The little foyer, with the neat small table and 4 careful chairs, and the bowl of little marigolds against the pale green walls David had painted himself. Beyond, the kitchenette, and beyond that, the big room where David read and slept, and the ceiling of which was a perpetual trouble to him. The plaster was falling in one corner, and no power on earth could make it less noticeable. David consoled himself for the plaster constantly with the thought that perhaps if he had not taken an apartment in an old brownstone, the plaster would not be falling. But then, too, for the money he paid, he could not have a foyer and a big room and a kitchenette anywhere else. He put his bag down on the table and put the butter away in the refrigerator and the rolls in the bread box. He folded the empty bag and put it in a drawer in the kitchenette. Then he hung his coat in the hall closet and went into the big room, which he called his living room, and lighted the desk. His word for the room, in his own mind, was charming. He had always been partial to yellows and browns, and he had painted the desk and the bookcases and the end tables himself, had even painted the walls, and had hunted around the city for the exact tweedish tan drapes he had in mind. The room satisfied him. The rug was a rich dark brown that picked up the darkest thread in the drapes. The furniture was almost yellow. The cover on the studio couch and the lampshades were orange. The rows of plants on the windowsills gave the touch of green the room needed. Right now, David was looking for an ornament to set on the end table, but he had his heart set on a low, translucent green bowl for more marigolds, and such things cost more than he could afford after the silverware. He could not come into this room without feeling that it was the most comfortable home he had ever had. Tonight, as always, he let his eyes move slowly around the room, from couch to drapes to bookcase, imagined the green bowl on the end table, and sighed as he turned to the desk. He took his pen from the holder and a sheet of the neat notepaper sitting in one of the desk cubbyholes, and wrote carefully, "Dear Marcia, don't forget you're coming for dinner tonight. I'll expect you about 6. He signed the note with a D and picked up the key to Marcia's apartment, which lay in the flat pencil tray on his desk. He had a key to Marcia's apartment because she was never home when her laundryman came, or when the man came to fix the refrigerator or the telephone or the windows, and someone had to let them in because the landlord was reluctant to climb 3 flights of stairs with the pass key. Marcia had never suggested having a key to David's apartment, and he had never offered her one. It pleased him to have only one key to his home, and that safely in his own pocket. It had a pleasant feeling to him, solid and small, the only way into his warm, fine home. He left his front door open and went down the dark hall to the other apartment. He opened the door with his key and turned on the light. This apartment was not agreeable for him to come into. It was exactly the same as his. foyer, kitchenette, living room, and it reminded him constantly of his first day in his own apartment, when the thought of the careful homemaking to be done had left him very close to despair. Marcia's home was bare and at random. An upright piano a friend had given her recently stood crookedly, half in the foyer, because the little room was too narrow and the big room was too cluttered for it to sit comfortably anywhere. Marcia's bed was unmade and a pile of dirty laundry lay on the floor. The window had been open all day and papers had blown wildly around the floor. David closed the window, hesitated over the papers, and then moved away quickly. He put the note on the piano keys and locked the door behind him. In his own apartment, he settled down happily to making dinner. He had made a little pot roast for dinner the night before. Most of it was still in the refrigerator, and he sliced it in fine, thin slices and arranged it on a plate with parsley. His plates were orange, almost the same color as the couch cover, and it was pleasant to him to arrange a salad with the lettuce on the orange plate and the thin slices of cucumber. He put coffee on to cook and sliced potatoes to fry, and then, with his dinner cooking agreeably and the window open to lose the odor of the frying potatoes, he set lovingly to arranging his table. First, the tablecloth, pale green, of course, and the 2 fresh green napkins, the orange plates and the precise cup and saucer at each place, the plate of rolls in the center, and the odd salt and pepper shakers, like 2 green frogs. 2 glasses. They came from the 5 and 10, but they had thin green bands around them. And finally, with great care, the silverware. Gradually, tenderly, David was buying himself a complete set of silverware. Starting out modestly with a service for 2, he had added to it until now he had well over a service for 4, although not quite a service for 6, lacking salad forks and soup spoons. He had chosen a sedate, pretty pattern, one that would be fine with any sort of table setting. And each morning, he gloried in a breakfast that started with a shining silver spoon for his grapefruit, and had a compact butter knife for his toast and a solid heavy knife to break his eggshell, and a fresh silver spoon for his coffee, which he sugared with a particular spoon meant only for sugar. The silverware lay in a tarnish-proof box on a high shelf all to itself, and David lifted it down carefully to take out a service for 2. It made a lavish display set out on the table. Knives, forks, salad, forks, more forks for the pie, a spoon to each place, and the special serving pieces. The sugar spoon, the large serving spoons for the potatoes and the salad, the fork for the meat, and the pie fork. When the table held as much silverware as 2 people could possibly use, he put the box back on the shelf and stood back, checking everything and admiring the table, shining and clean. Then he went into his living room to read his mother's letter and wait for Marcia. The potatoes were done before Marcia came, and then suddenly the door burst open, and Marcia arrived with a shout and fresh air and disorder. She was a tall, handsome girl with a loud voice, wearing a dirty raincoat, and she said, "I didn't forget, Davy. I'm just late as usual. What's for dinner? You're not mad, are you?" David got up and came over to take her coat. "I left a note for you," he said. "Didn't see it," Marcia said. "Haven't been home. Something smells good." "Fried potatoes," David said. "Everything's ready." Golly. Marcia fell into a chair to sit with her legs stretched out in front of her and her arms hanging. "I'm tired," she said. "It's cold out." "It was getting colder when I came home," David said. He was putting dinner on the table, the platter of meat, the salad, the bowl of fried potatoes. He walked quietly back and forth from the kitchenette to the table, avoiding Marcia's feet. "I don't believe you've been here since I got my silverware," he said. Marcia swung around to the table and picked up a spoon. "It's beautiful," she said.